This turned into an 8-year effort. If someone had told me that in advance, like you're signing on to an 8-year, maybe 100, 200 hours a year to try to get state funding, I probably wouldn't have done that.
This is Unlawful. Welcome to Unlawful. As always, I'm Brandon Renken, and with me today is Bob Glaves. Bob is the executive director of the Chicago Bar Foundation and one of my favorite types of Unlawful because he's a new friend that I just met today. Welcome to the show, Bob. So the first question I have is, what is the Chicago Bar Foundation? What do y'all do?
We're the charitable arm of the Chicago Bar Association up here, and it's really where our legal community comes together to help people who can't afford us as our services, right?
Yep.
Which is most people, as it turns out. So we have a lot to do.
Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but you've actually been the head of the Chicago Bar Foundation since like 1999, right?
Yep. I was 9 years into my practice and I moved over and I thought I was going to do it for 2 or 3 years. And now we're 24 years later, right?
And that means, I have to think that means a lot of what the foundation does today, you were kind of there at the inception of, right?
Yes, we're 75 years old, so you've
been there for a third of the time.
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of a scary way to put it into context.
It's always funny to look at that context. Another person we've had on the show currently is the general counsel for the Houston Rockets. And it was funny because if you put together all the time he's been at the Rockets, he's been there for 25 years. And that's like half of the time that the team has existed. That's a big deal. What's your unlawful moment?
It's a moment that extended a lot longer than I thought it was going to. So when I was a newer lawyer, I started in May of 91, and I was a commercial and tort litigator. And I was at a firm where, as I was getting started, I was encouraged to get involved in the bar. And
Sure.
I always had an interest in policy and advocacy work on a bigger picture than just client-based, and wanted to stay involved in that some way. And so I joined a couple of committees over here at the Bar Association to stay connected to that as I'm starting to learn to be a lawyer, start practicing, and eventually be a trial attorney. So one of the committees I joined was called the Legal Aid Committee, and then there's also a legislative committee here that I joined. And I don't know, not even a year into my time at the Legal Aid Committee, it's a lot of the legal aid organizations and then people from the private bar who care about pro bono and stuff. And the legal aid folks are saying, we have no state funding for legal aid. We depend all on federal money and it's getting tight. It really limits our capacity to be able to do this. Thinking to myself, why wouldn't we have state funding for this?
Sure.
That seems crazy, right? And so they were looking for volunteers to work on trying to draft some legislation and advocate for it to try to get more state funding. I'm like, well, that sounds great. That's a good match for me. I'm interested in advocacy, legislative process, and this seems like a no-brainer. I'm happy to jump into this. So this is 92. We do draft up a bill and go down and start talking to people about it. And they're like, why would we do that? And it didn't go over so well necessarily at the beginning. And so it was going to be a bigger lift than I thought. So I'm like, okay, we're going to be working on this next year too. Fast forward, this turned into an 8-year effort. If someone had told me that in advance, like you're signing on to an 8-year, maybe 100, 200 hours a year to try to get state funding,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have done that.
But again, you're the implementation guy.
Yeah.
You were committed to implementation, right?
Yeah. So I was still practicing and busy at the firm and everything, and they were giving space to do this. And our state capital is about 3.5 hours from here. So I started spending more time on it, getting to really know all the people in our legal aid community in a new way, really getting involved in a lot of the legislative process, both internally at the bar, but externally in the legislature, to try to make the case and try to figure out how are we going to get over this hump, and meeting lots of judges and other lawyers who became part of this effort to where I was sort of the lead coordinator is
Sure.
what it turned into. But by just being involved with showing up every year to be doing this, I started to be known around the bar and in the legal community as the access to justice guy, even though I'm a commercial litigator, right? Out there litigating, right? And so we finally got there in early 99, got over the hump to pass a bill that was not funded, but we at least had a framework to get funding for legal aid, and later got a commitment from the governor to put $500,000 to start in the next budget, which 500,000 from zero was a lot. Anyway, that became my moment because through all that, I was really engaged in the bar, is really engaged with the legal aid and the pro bono community. And this opportunity came along to actually do this full time, where that would be my job. And I thought, wow, I never thought I would do that.
Right. Yeah.
I was right around that associate partner time frame, and so it was going to be a pay cut, but not a life changer yet at that point. And I thought, well, I'll try it for 2 or 3 years and see what I think. But like, this could be a really cool opportunity, and then figure out what I'm going to do next in my career. But not thinking I'm leaving practice for good at this point. But one thing led to another. They gave me the opportunity. I've continued to do this work now full time as my job, working with the legal community, and it's really been an amazing run.
We talked about it a moment ago, but for a third of the existence of the thing, right? You talk about leaving practice and you say, oh, I didn't plan on leaving it full time. Well, 25 years at the same job, especially in this day and age, is 2 full times, right? It's just an incredible legacy that you're going to leave behind. And it's crazy that it started with a $0 to $500,000 delta that you thought was going to take a couple months and ended up taking 8 years.
It's turned into much more since then, thankfully. And there's obviously still a need for more funding for the work. And we advocacy for that funding from the legal community, but beyond the legal community, from our government partners at all levels is a part of our work now too. But yeah, it became a real opportunity, and that's what sort of opened my eyes to kind of the macro level issues around this. If we don't take the lead in this, no one else is going to. If the legal community is not the one out in front of that, making that case, and we talk about this all the time, I could walk down my block, and if I was talking about the American Cancer Society, I could probably get everybody to give to that because they've all experienced that in some
right.
But other than the 2 people who are connected to our profession who live around me, the rest of them would be like, to give to what? It's just not going to connect to them in the same way.
It's interesting because you can accidentally wander into something that becomes hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in expense that, frankly, I'm a lawyer. I've been working my whole life, would bankrupt me.
Yep.
And that's a difficult and daunting thing. But by the same token, it shouldn't just be the people who can afford it who have access to justice. One of the people who I recently interviewed for this show is Jeff Chivers, and he is the founder of an AI for litigation startup. And he talks about how it's possible that the impact of AI on litigation will not necessarily be the loss of billable hours or the loss of jobs or the reduction of law firms. It may have that impact, but his hope is that the real impact will be the democratization of the legal process in some respect, because suddenly you'll have tools that will make things like reviewing thousands of documents or managing millions of pages of stuff far more economical for the normal person, right? Not the company who can do it because that's part of their infrastructure, right? Yeah. And that becomes a really serious thing, because not only does it enable individuals to have access to that, it enables lawyers who don't have 100 associates at their beck and call to manage that kind of defense. So suddenly you can, at least from a mechanical perspective, compete with people who have far greater resources.
Yeah. No, for sure. In a case like that, all that kind of stuff where a lawyer is really important for counseling and advocating for you when you're dealing. But a lot of it is just the procedure of the whole thing that is way more complicated than it should be. And that's one of the things we work on with the courts, is trying to simplify things. But AI and some of these tools can really cut through some of that to make it easier for someone to handle those parts of the case. So where you're really going to use the lawyer is when you really need them. And it makes it a lot more affordable and easier for pro bono legal aid or whoever is going to be involved, right?
Look, I'm thankful just for having this few minutes to talk to you about it. And I really appreciate the efforts that you and people like you are pursuing every day to help democratize justice. So thank you so much for spending the time with me. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And I hope that if you ever need anything in Houston, you'll reach out, and I'll certainly be an advocate for you in our Chicago office as well. But thanks so much, Bob.